Alrighty, so back to Politician Week. Now, yesterday I talked about my story of not exact politics, but more church politics, because that's kind of what I saw growing up. And pretty much what I said was the moral of the story was that when you treat the congregation, the community, the society as separate, as this thing you can work on and fix from the outside, then you've lost the plot. You can't actually do that. You're just wrong. And so with politicians, that's often how they talk. They talk about the economy. They talk about the community, the society, about we have these laws in this country, right? This state, this country, this city, this whatever. They're not talking about people. They're talking about groups. And they think in groups and all these different stuff. And they say, okay, well, we'll get this demographic, and then we got that demographic. They're not individual people. I mean, technically, if you want to get into specifics, right? But, like, you don't treat them that way. You don't treat them like people. You treat them in groups, right? And once you do that, once you treat the people as just a collective group, you're never going to make things better, because they're not just a group. They're a bunch of individuals. And you can't fix individual problems by treating them as collective problems. There are some collective problems for sure. But most problems are really individual problems that are compounded across many people. And so one way that I know how to talk about this is many people think of, when they think of a church, for example, you have the pastor and the congregation, and then the pastor leads the congregation, right? That's the model. And in a biblical sense, right, you think of Jesus as the good shepherd, right? And then the church being the sheep that follow him, and he takes care of them and all this stuff. And so then it's natural to say, okay, well then what we do is we take the pastor, and he's the shepherd standing in for Jesus, right? And then the congregation's just the sheep, and they'll follow, and the shepherd will take care of them, make sure that they're healthy, all this stuff. Now there's 2 points to be made here. First of all, the sheep are what are important. The shepherd, whether they're there or not, it's the sheep that matter. Because if you, for example, were the shepherd of a big, huge flock of sheep, if you left and didn't come back for a year, but then you came back and it turned out that the sheep were fine without you, well, then you wouldn't have lost any value. You would get just as much wool, just as much mutton, all that kind of stuff. Now, obviously, talking about people like sheep is pretty grotesque, but that's the analogy. But yeah, your farm would be just as productive, provided that the sheep were able to take care of themselves. Like, what does the shepherd really provide? He doesn't provide food. That's the grass. He didn't grow the grass. He owns the grass. He owns the land, but he didn't make it. And he may provide water. That could be a thing, but maybe there's already a water source there. So maybe not. Protection from predators depends if there's predators. And so on and so forth. There's lots of little tiny things that the shepherd provides, but mostly the shepherd does nothing. And that's for the sheep's benefit. If the shepherd was getting into their business every second of every day, those sheep would probably get pretty mad. They don't want to be micromanaged. So that's point number one. Point number two, and some Christians forget this, is the pastor, well, if we're using this analogy of sheep and shepherds, pastor would be a sheep too. Because he's a person. And so it doesn't really matter. They're the same. And so to artificially raise yourself up as being higher and greater and more important, it just doesn't work like that. It doesn't work that way. And so the much better analogy that the church uses is the body of Christ. That you have different people, different skills, and different sources of different knowledge and abilities and all whatever, right? And you bring them all together, and as separate, they're not nearly as great, but together they can do a lot more. And that is how societies work. It's the coming together of all these different types of people with all these different responsibilities, all these different skills. And that's much more healthy of a dynamic. That's a much better way to think of each other. Because you may think that, oh man, your job is so important. Maybe you think, yeah, you're the brains of the operation, right? But without the heart, you're brain dead. Without your lungs, oxygen deprived. Without the mouth, mute. Right? That all of our ability to do things in the world are because we have our whole body to exert at a problem, to fix things and make things better. And in that same way, you need the whole of society, everyone, in order to fix these problems. And so, yeah, there's probably some room for someone's job in some way, shape, or form to coordinate people, to facilitate things getting solved. But understand, you're just a part of the body too. No greater, no less. That without each and every one of us, we wouldn't be nearly as great. And that's important to remember. It's an easy thing to forget because, hey, they're just a group, right? It's just the economy. It's just the society. It's just the community. It's just the country. It's just the world. But when you segment people off and you say, hey, no, you're not of this caliber. You can't solve this problem. Let someone else do it, right? That was the whole message of what I said yesterday. The moral of the story was when you start saying, hey, that's not your job, well then, when it's not your job, why would you care? And that's the biggest issue with politicians. Is that, yeah, their job is a pretty scummy job, right? Playing on people's worst instincts. And yeah, they just want to self-aggrandize and all that stuff. Sure. That says stuff about them as a moral person, right? That it's hard to be a politician and be a moral person. Yeah, we get that. But now I'm talking about effectiveness. That at the end of the day, if they did make things better, then we would be like, fine, you're a bad person. I wouldn't want you as a friend, but at least my bills are getting paid, right? At least I'm not drowning in debt. At least, society's running and everything's going smoothly. And when times are good, that's usually the response of people. They don't look at what the politicians do, what the politicians are making happen. Like, they don't care. If it's good, you ignore it because who cares? And that's when they screw it up. And then a few years come down the line and you're like, what's this dumb law that's been like causing so much pain in the community? Like, when did we pass that? Like, what happened? And they passed it when you weren't looking, when you weren't paying attention. So the debate's over. Oh, you want to open that up again? Now, get with the times. We're on this next issue. Don't even worry about it, right? Because when it's your solution, not only do you understand it and feel good about it, but you understand why it works. And so when it's just some guy coming along and be like, oh, I'm gonna fix your problem, and you don't know why it works, you don't know how it works, you don't know why you would do this as opposed to that, well, then you're just gonna, even if it did work, you wouldn't understand why it had the effect you wanted. And so you might see some of those superficial trappings of it and be like, well, let's just do that. And that's the thing. If you're not invested in the solution, then the solution won't work for you. Because you won't understand why it works. This is why so many people have such a hard time with those get-rich-quick schemes, right? Because they see, oh man, this thing works? What? They told me. I'd be false advertising if they said it. They're like practically guaranteeing me success. When in actuality, you look into the results of the people who take those courses, who go through those programs, all that kind of stuff. Very low. Like, what? Less than 8%? And that's like 8%, like, what was it? There's like 8% of people who take these online courses to make money. 8% of them make a McDonald's income, right? Like, they work hard and they barely scrape by. And they were lucky to scrape by. Like, that's how that works with money, with those get-rich-quick schemes. And now why don't they work? Because presumably, if it's not a complete scam, the guy, like, they became rich, and so why can't they teach everyone else? Well, because they're talking about the trappings, the pieces that they did that were lucky or in the moment, or, they just don't work anymore. And so they're sharing all these things that don't actually matter, because the true answer would obviously be, every single time, every single way, work hard, be consistent, spend below your means, and, learn everything you can. Everyone knows that. But people like to be superior. They like to be like, no, I got the results and you didn't. So obviously, I know something that you don't. That's not always true. Oftentimes, it's not that they know something you don't, it's that they do something you don't. And this is why, we have a pretty good society here in America, and we have a pretty good time with democracy. But, not all democracies across the world are the same. Like we could of course talk about the, Democratic Republic of North Korea, right? You could say that's not a real democracy, of course, and I think you're probably right on that one, but but you get my point. That just magically sprinkling on putting something to a vote doesn't fix your problems. That magically having a politician write laws doesn't fix your problems. That there's no secret sauce special thing that you could just slap on there and be like, boom, everything's fixed, right? I changed the machine and now it'll crank out more good sheep and that'll be great. That's not how life works. It's not how people work. And so what I'm saying here, what I'm trying to bring across is really that politicians, the real value that they can provide is not in doing it for you or setting up a system that'll make it happen automatically. That sounds like a get-rich-quick scheme. That sounds like a lie. No, what a politician's actual good and right purpose is to facilitate you fixing those problems. To say, hey, there's something in your way. Well, can we remove it? We can? Then let's do that. It's saying, hey, how many things can we take away from all of this bureaucracy, all of this, surveillance, all of this, all of these different oversight committees and blah, 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 like what, all of these different things. See how much you can take away, and once you do, who's responsible, right? Because, there's probably a way where we can do without government at all. I certainly think that. But we've stacked up this Jenga tower 100 feet tall, and so you got to be careful when you pull out those blocks. Eventually, we'll dismantle that tower and we won't have to worry about knocking it over. But until then, we got to figure out how to do it piece by piece. And that's really the job of a politician, is to facilitate society doing things on its own. To set up the pasture so that way you don't need a shepherd around all the time. Because fundamentally, the politicians are not different than us. They're sheep too. And it's easy for them to forget that, but it's true. That we're all in this boat together. And that's why, as much as it is easy to blame politicians for all of our problems, they're doing it to themselves. All this bad stuff that they end up doing hurts them too. And so the goal shouldn't be, French Revolution, chop their head off. It should be to recognize that, yeah, what they're doing isn't working, sure. but then replace it with something that does. What can you personally, individually do to make your life better? So that way, the politician has one less person to worry about. Until eventually, the politician has no one to worry about. And when the politician has no one to worry about, no problems to fix because everyone's fixing their own problems, well, maybe we won't need them anymore, right? Maybe they can actually do something useful. Maybe they won't have to whore themselves out to a society that's demanding them to do bad things. Maybe they can do something productive in their own right. Maybe they can actually do something meaningful. That out of all the bad things that politicians do, out of all of the people that they hurt, they're hurting themselves too. And it's important to remember that not only are they not treating us like people, oftentimes we're not treating them like people either. And sometimes that's placing them above us, and sometimes that's placing them below us. But they're just like us. They're the same. They just have a unfortunate profession. So hopefully we can get them out of that. So that way they're not boxed into that corner doing bad stuff and being resentful of everyone who makes them do the bad stuff. And then they can just be normal people again, right? Be good. And so, that's what I think.